So, guys, if you can see and hear us, can you post something in the chat, please? Fingers crossed. This should work. Come on. Why don't I see it on YouTube? Aha, there we go. I think we are live. People in the chat, hello. Thank you very much for joining this episode of The Deep Dive. Today, we are joined by writer, not author, Ryan Holiday. Ryan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, so what's the distinction for you between writer and author?
So that was one thing I was going to ask you about. That why do you prefer to refer to yourself as a writer rather than an author? At least that's the impression I get from your website.
I've actually never thought about whether I do it consciously or not.
Yeah.
I do tend to like, so if I'm at like at a party or something back when one did such things, when someone would say like, what do you do? I usually say I'm a writer.
Yeah.
Because if you say that you're an author, then they immediately ask you what books you've written, and then you have to talk about it, and it's always a pain. So writer usually just sort of ends the conversation, which is usually what I'm trying to do.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I saw there was a blog post that you wrote, which was which seemed to imply that author implies, like, if you think of yourself as an author, that implies some kind of focus on the results, whereas writer is more implies a focus on the process.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And if I said that, then I certainly agree with it. But yeah, I think like I get up every day and I sit at my desk and I write. And books come out of the backside of that process, as opposed to I am consciously trying to make a certain amount of books or books that sell a certain amount of copies. So I think if you do identify with the craft more than the sort of the shiny stuff that the public ultimately sees, that's a better way to do it.
Nice. Have you ever come across Brandon Sanderson?
No.
So he is my favorite fiction author of all time. He wrote a series called the Stormlight Archive, which is like this enormous fantasy series that I've been listening to on Audible since like for the last 3 years because it's really long. But in that, there's this there are the Knights Radiant, and one of their ideals is life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. And that last bit, journey before destination, is something I always think about. Be like, it's actually more about the journey and it's a lot less about the destination. And it sounds like you're on the same page with that.
Yeah, and I wasn't always there. I mean, I think especially early on in your career, like you want to have a book because it feels like a sort of a huge milestone if you're someone who grew up loving books, which I did.
Yeah.
But as I've gotten further along, and maybe this is also just part of getting older, one of the things you sort of realize, and I think this really hit me on my book Stillness, which is like, I don't know how much fun I was necessarily having on the other books. So it was often like a process you were trying to finish. Like you're like, I want to get this book done. It was unpleasant. And, or just because it was hard. And I just sort of realized it was like, actually, you only get so many cracks at this. If you're not having fun, if you're not enjoying it, sort of what are you doing? And so I think now I think about it as like, did I do everything I could and did I enjoy myself for that day? So I think more too, like if like I'm in the later stages of a book right now, if I died, I wouldn't be ashamed if that book came out. So there's always like work I'm trying to do, but I also wouldn't, and I'm lucky enough on this one, it's far enough along that you could really understand it. But like, I want even the little parts that I've done to reflect my intention for the whole. So you get to a place where you're just, I think I wrote this in one of my books, but the closer you get to mastery in a craft, I think the less you care about external results and the more you care about the immediate task in front of you or just the day's work.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. I had a long list of questions about specifically writing and your writing practice because so I'm working on my own first book, which I haven't like officially announced yet or anything like that, but it's sort of slowly trundling along. And so at the moment, like for example, this morning I spent 2 hours sort of trying to figure out structure, because I feel like for a kind of non-fiction self-help book, which sort of something like this would loosely fall under,
Sure.
I feel like structure is one of the most important things. I wonder if there's any kind of sort of stuff you wish you'd known before writing the first one, because that's sort of the position that I'm at the moment.
So it's not one of the most important things. It is the most important thing.
Okay.
Structure is everything.
Right.
And it's not just important as far as what the finished product is, but it's also important as far as workflow goes. So what a lot of writers do incorrectly is they just sit down and write and they try to figure it out on the page as they're going.
Mm.
And so, I mean, no one would go like, okay, I'm in New York and I'm trying to make it to California. I'll leave and I'll figure out where I'm going as I'm going. That would be a recipe for getting horribly lost,
Mm.
right? You have to have not just a clear destination, but you have to have the pathway to get there. You have to have an understanding of the geography. You have to have an understanding of the terrain you're avoiding, and all of these things. So I don't start a book until until I've cracked the structure. You have to have structurally what the concept is, because if you don't, then you have no idea how to break up the corresponding parts. You have no idea you have no idea whether you have enough material or not, and you have no idea ultimately when you finished if you actually did what you were setting out to do. So the structure is the most essential thing. And so I started as a writer as a research assistant. So I sort of adopted the methodology of a different writer, a great writer named Robert Greene, who's like sort of my hero as an author. But obviously my books are different than his, but the idea that you have to figure out the structure and then you have to get everything you need for all the individual pieces before you set down to write is just, to me, the best way to do it. And I really think it's the only way to do it.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah. So the way I'm approaching it is like structure first, and then sort of me and the editor are kind of going back and forth, sort of, we're spending a hell of a long time thinking about what the structure is going to be. And then what I've got in my head is that, okay, then I'll write like a sort of executive summary of each of the chapters once we've done that, and write the bits that link the chapters together. And only then will I start actually sitting down to write the book.
Yes. And so with my first book, I was much more explicit about it. I can operate a little bit more intuitively on later books. But yeah, it's like, okay, sort of what are the structures? Is it a 2-part book? Is it a 3-part book? Is it a 7-part book? Is it a 10-chapter book? You have to answer all these questions. Then you have to define what all those corresponding pieces were. So I went down on a piece of paper. My first book was going to be, I think, 3 parts. And then it was, I was going to have 20 chapters in each part or whatever it is. Then I wrote a sentence describing each one, a paragraph describing each one. I listed the bullet points. So you're doing a really full outline. As I've gone on, my outline is actually less written, and it's more. I can't show you because I'm on my computer, but I do this all on on note cards. I know you're familiar with the sort of Rome research thing. I sort of do it an analog version of that, which I learned from Robert. And so at all the piece, like I'm working on a multi-book. This is the first time I've done this. I'm working on a series of books.
Okay.
So I'm not just doing it one time, but I'm having to make each decision has the implications for three other books. And then so I'm having to sort of simultaneously do it multiple times. But the idea is it's all in the box, and then you have the pieces, and then you're tackling the pieces.
Okay. Yeah, because I saw a picture on your website that you posted of your box of note cards, and I was going to ask you about that. Like, so why have you gone analog rather than digital with the note card thing?
Well, it's definitely not like going analog in the sense that I was once digital and I switched to analog. It's that I read a physical book, and then as I think most writers do, I find it really hard to read and research digitally. So I read physical books. And like I don't even know how people do it with audiobooks. Like you have to be, so I just had lunch and I was sitting down, I'm reading a book about Franklin Roosevelt, and I have a pen and I'm marking all the stuff that I'm reading. And then at some point, like these are 2 books I have to go through. They're on my desk. I don't know if you can see, but you can see these are all the pages that I marked. So I have to go through these pages, and then I'll transfer those onto note cards.
Yeah.
So I've done this for years and years and years. So I have thousands of cumulative note cards, but then I also have the stuff I'm researching for the new book or the new books or whatever it is. And then you're starting to identify patterns. You're organizing them around patterns. So you have your stack for each specific thing. Now I know people go, but digitally you could have this all this way, and you can. But the real advantage of having it physical is that you're interacting with the material multiple times. So it's creating sort of a muscle memory or an intuitive feel for the stuff. And a book is physical. You want to be able to move the pieces around. So, like as an example, I've more or less finished the draft of the new book. Now I had like an extra stack of note cards that I wasn't able to fit in, but was stuff I wanted. I was sort of like, okay, now where will this go? And I can see the whole thing laid out, and I'm able to like reassign or shuffle the pieces around.
Okay. So what does a note card look like for you? Is it sort of, are we talking like I there's that Zettelkasten method of note taking where it's like,
Yes.
1 point per card with lots of links to other cards? Is that kind of how you do it, or what?
Yeah, sort of. I'm trying to think if I have a good one that I'm showing. So this is just a quote from Aeschylus,
Yeah.
the playwright, and so I just wrote the quote on there. And I would show you one of the ones from the new book, but it had like now I get my own note cards printed that have like the titles or the themes of the books on them.
Okay.
So I can't show you
Yeah.
without giving away what
Sure.
it is. But like I have, so it's got like some material at the top that allows me to categorize where the note card goes, in which book, in which part. But usually it's a quote. Sometimes, I mean, I have note cards with just a word. Like a word will strike me. I'll be like, I like that word. That might be relevant for this book.
Okay.
And then when I start to actually organize that book, I'll pull up that card because I'm going through them and I'll see it and be like, I think this will work in this section. And then I drop the card into that section.
Interesting. Okay. So what about if you're not working on a book, but you're still doing reading? And are you still forming cards, or is the cards
Yeah.
purely a sort of when you're writing a book?
No, no. The card is to organize anything I ever read that
Oh,
I like.
amazing. Okay.
And so I have now an archive going back, 10 or 15 years of stuff. So like it's interesting, like on the new book, obviously I have these new cards, but what's been really sort of in like nostalgic and interesting is as I'm going through, I'll be like, I can obviously date the cards to way back, you know. So it was interesting. Like I wrote a card about something in from Herodotus's stories about the 300 Spartans, and it was, I said, here's this story, page whatever Herodotus. So I was like, okay, and I found that when I was, organizing my stuff, and I went through and I went and I got my copy of Herodotus off the shelf, and it just sort of blew my mind to think I read this in 2006 and I noted it down. I thought it was something. And now in 2020, that's paying off for the first time. So,
Yeah.
that's 14 years of, it sort of sitting in the bank account collecting interest, and now it's paid off.
That's really interesting. So I've got a video coming out, I think tomorrow, about my process for taking notes from books. And the way that I'm framing it is that I really regret not having done this 15 years ago, because
Of
now
course.
what I'm doing is I'm doing kind of, this book in 3 sentences and writing notes here and there. And I'm thinking, oh man, if I'd been doing this since the age of 12, since I started reading nonfiction, this would have been so helpful.
Yeah, there's that line, which I probably put on a note card somewhere, where it's like, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. So you definitely, the earlier you do it, the better. And there are books that I read that I didn't do it for, but even this, that 15 years ago I read this book and I folded a page.
Yeah.
Now when I go back, it's easier for me to find that thing. So it's a thing that takes time to accumulate, but the returns compound, and so now it's obviously very, very beneficial.
Okay, interesting. And sort of again, to continue in this sort of in the weeds of this note-taking type
Yeah.
stuff, there is a school of thought these days that says that you should not be relying on your own brain to remember anything at all, and you should allow your box of notes or equivalent to be the thing that sparks connections.
Yes.
I sort of, to the small extent that I've done this with notes, I haven't really found that I've made any major insights through the system. Most of my insights have come in through driving in the car one day and thinking, oh, there was that thing that I read, sort of using my
Yes.
actual brain. I wonder what that proportion is like for you, kind of your actual brain versus your box system thingy bringing up insights sporadically?
I mean, I feel like the person who's making that argument, that somehow these things are mutually exclusive, strikes me as someone who's not actually done that much creative work. So what happens is, you're recording things because because you read a book doesn't mean it's magically in your brain.
Yeah.
The process of taking notes and recording them and organizing them is important for reference, but it's also in the fact that, like, so when I read a book, I read it once, then obviously I'm thinking about it as I'm, noting it down. Then as I go back through the book and I transfer it to note cards, I'm thinking about it. Then as I organize it in the box, and then as I move it around or perhaps make copies of it because I've decided to use it in multiple places, I'm now interacting with the material on multiple occasions. So to me, it's the interaction and the repeated, almost chance encounters with the material that's creating the connections.
Yep.
And you might not even realize that's happening. So what you'll be doing is you'll be writing, and some connection will just magically come through, and then you'll go, I know I have this somewhere, and you'll find it. Or for me, I tend to write and do my creative work in the morning, and then I do my exercise in the afternoons or the evenings, and oftentimes things will pop into my head then that are the result of connections that have been made over the course of a long period of time.
Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. One last question on this topic. Let's say you're not actively working on a book right now, and you read something that's interesting. How do you organize the card that comes from that? Is it by topic or by book or by color? Like,
I usually have a set of topics that I'm interested in. So I have like the boxes that I'm doing for a specific book, but then I also have what they call a commonplace book, which I know you know about. So that's just sort of the miscellaneous collection, and I have different themes there. I have themes about Stoicism. I have themes about cities that I've lived in or I'm interested in. I have themes about politics or strategy or business or marketing. So I kind of just have general buckets, but I also just have an enormous catalog of just miscellaneous stuff. And so one of the things I do when I start a book is I go through the miscellaneous folder, like pretty early on in the process. And it might have been years since I've done this, but by just going through the random section, I'm finding all this stuff that, oh, this could work, or I could move this over here. And then one of the things I also do is every time you do a project, you have like a leftover file, like stuff you thought you would use. I always go through the sort of the recycling bin, so to speak, and sometimes you find little things here and there as well.
Yeah, and I suppose if you're writing a book, the leftovers can often become the spark for blog posts or things like that help then.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's
well, and also you sometimes discover stuff that you wish would have gone in the book, but it's too late. So I actually I keep the boxes open, right? Like whether maybe I'll do another edition, but also like the reason I wrote the book is because I'm interested in that topic, and so I continue researching even after the project has been completed.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, because like one thing that really that always strikes me about your books is that the examples that you draw from are so vast. Like, you'll be talking about an Alabama football coach one day, and then you'll be talking about some, ancient Greek Stoic the next day. And I guess this diversity of examples is a result of your reading over the last 15 years that has kind of let you get to this point. And so you're not really starting from scratch when you're researching a book. You're actually just assembling stuff you've already got, and then research adds to that, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I tend to read widely. I'm always looking for stuff. I have a sort of a diverse set of interests. And then what will happen is, like, let's say I'm researching Ulysses S. Grant when I'm writing my ego book. You're trying to sort of use him on one lens, but then, you'll be in the middle of another book, and some story that you remembered, maybe you wrote it down, maybe you didn't, will come back to you. So it's almost like these just sort of become, the way I think about it is these are almost like recurring characters or storylines through the books, even if the books are of totally different topics. So I kind of have these lifelong relationships with the historical figures, and that makes it really fun too, because then you can read multiple biographies of the same person. You don't think that just because you read one 600-page book about someone that was published 50 years ago
Yeah.
that you fully understand them. And by looking at them from these different angles, or it's like sometimes a character might be a hero in one of my books, but that same character is more of a villain in a different book because people are complicated and have somewhat contradictory traits sometimes.
Okay. On the reading front, so one trap that I think I fall into, and that I'm sure a lot of people watching this will fall into, is that when you're interested in things like personal development, it's very easy to sort of follow the stock diet of, for example, your books and, for
Yeah.
example, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, 48 Laws of Power. You know, there is a canon of books, and you know there are books on that list that everyone will have read, and I know that you know people like you who write a lot of books and do it very well always say that it's really important to have like a very diverse sort of reading diet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what are your thoughts on sort of that, because it seems like you read books in all sorts of different domains, not just like the self-help
There's a
genre.
there's a good quote. I think it's from Murakami where he's saying, if you only read the books that other people are reading, you'll only think the things that other people are thinking. So I kind of do have a bias against like sort of popular
Mm,
contemporary books. Obviously, that's a little hypocritical given the books that I do. But when I read a book, whether it's the 48 Laws of Power or some contemporary book, I'm my test of whether it's good or not is whether it introduces me to new things and whether it makes me go read other books.
okay.
So, when I pick up, I think the reason a lot of these sort of pop psychology self-help books don't work is that they first off they repeat like the same 10 studies or the same 10
Mm,
bits of information, and the often the writer never got them firsthand. The writer only heard about them
yeah.
from other books. So that's actually kind of a problem too we have in the US politically. A lot of the sort of people who are sort of political pundits or thinkers don't have any understanding with the underlying history or source material. They've just read other commentators. So it's sort of like a refraction of a refraction of a
Mm,
refraction. You do have to go to the actual source material. So one of the things I am trying to do in my books is being a gateway or an entry point into a whole bunch of other things. So that's one of the reasons I try to draw from a diversity of examples and from a lot of obscure stuff is I want people to hear about something for the very first time and then decide to go further down that rabbit hole. But generally, I try to read older books. I try to read, like, I try to sort of balance between the classics, between sort of obscure bits of history, like the lesser known figures, and then I try to read sort of interesting modern stuff that brings those stuff together that then allows me to sort of repeat that process again.
okay. And on the on the theme of you introducing sort of other people to other things, one theme that seems to be throughout your blog is your love of Tyler Cohen.
I do love Tyler, yes.
And so I've only ever listened to like two of his podcast episodes, not really knowing anything about him. So I was going to ask you like, what is Tyler's deal, and like who should check out his stuff?
So I started reading Tyler's blog, Marginal Revolution, when I was in college, and Tyler is kind of like he's a polymath, and he's just a singular kind of thinker. He from Marginal Revolution is one of the few blogs left that like posts every day or
Mm,
multiple times a day. So I'm just always getting exposed to new stuff through Tyler, and almost always a new perspective on stuff. Tyler tends to have, I don't want to say contrarian, that almost sounds insulting, but he tends to have a unique perspective on things that he didn't just borrow from someone else.
yeah.
And I think, like, it's weird. Like, Tyler is an economist, but I don't really know that much about his economic work, right? Like, what I like about him is that he really is just like a thinker. He's just like a public intellectual, as they used to be, just a really smart person who has interesting ideas and theories about the world and is good at communicating them. And so, yeah, he's been really influential to me, and I've only met him maybe one time, but his work has been definitely a through line through mine over the years.
Okay. So like Is there an easy bucket that you could sort of put his work into, or is it just so varied that kind of public intellectual is the only real way of describing his stuff?
Yeah, I guess you could. I mean, public intellectual would be one way to do it. I would just say he's like an independent thinker
Hmm.
who merges sort of economics and psychology and politics and history all together into a lens for understanding both the past and the present. So, um, and he's kind of an aggregator of information. So I really value thinkers who, as I was saying, introduced me to other thinkers or ways of thinking. So it's like if you there are certain people who are really smart and you follow them and you just learn what they think, and that's really valuable.
Yeah.
But what Tyler is great at is he's an aggregator of other thinkers. So you're really getting access to many other smart people who you probably would not have heard about through him. So he's kind of a force multiplier. In a way that I think great teachers are.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I definitely need to check out his stuff. And I was browsing through Amazon. I see he's got like a ton of books as well. So it seems like
I
a
really
good.
like his
Yeah.
book. Average is Over is really good. The Complacent Class is really good. But I think his blog. I mean, it's really hard to beat his blog. His blog's just the best.
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, I've got a long list of posts to go through on that front. Kind of moving around a little bit. I think you've said that you're not really keen on living in big cities like New York. So the choice of trying to figure out where you want to live, it's like a surprisingly important thing that a lot of us just sort of do by default. That this is where I went to university, or this is where I got my first job, and therefore that's where I'm going to live. I get the impression that you've kind of thought a bit harder about it than, let's kind of say, the default path.
I guess it's a little crazy that it's not considered a big deal to
Mm,
people. Like to me, it's sort of the main deal. Like where are you going to spend your time? How are you going to vote with your feet on sort of what's important to you and what the environment that you're in is going to be? Um, I mean, it definitely was a process for me of exploring different things. At first, early on in my career, was much more obviously constrained by the opportunities that I was relying
yeah.
on. But as I've sort of been more and more in control of my own destiny, I've just tried to be very deliberate about where I live and what I think. We know that our environment shapes so many things, not just our happiness, but the quality of the output of the work that we do. And so to not optimize your living space for that seems to me to be, leaving a lot on the table.
So how have you landed on Austin? And is it like a farmhouse that you live in or something? I remember reading that
Yeah, I
somewhere.
do. So I've lived in Los Angeles, I've lived in New York, I've lived in New Orleans, I've lived in the city, now I live in the country. I've tried different experiments, and of course I've also traveled pretty widely. But for me, I lived in LA and I got tired of it and I moved to the South when I was writing my first book. I
Mm,
moved to New Orleans and I really loved the change of pace, but it was maybe too far in the other direction. And then I moved to New York when my first book came out, and there was some things I liked and some things I really didn't like about that. And it became clear to me that I wanted to live a little bit more off the beaten path. I didn't want to live in a major city, but I still wanted access to major city things.
mm,
Like I wanted a peer group if I needed it, but that I didn't want to always be surrounded by, or surrounded by people or obligated to attend events or things like that. So I moved to Austin and we liked it, but we ended up moving more out into the country, which was sort of the ultimate fine tuning. Obviously, living in the country has worked out quite well during a pandemic, which I couldn't have predicted. But I think really optimizing for what you want your life to look
mm.
like is really important. A lot of people optimize for their career, and then you go, but what do you want? If you made $1 million or something, what would you do? They're like, well, I would leave. And you're like, okay, so you're living day to day in something you don't like for the future hope of being able to make a change to get to what you do like. And so people go, oh yeah, but you can say this, you're very successful or privileged. It's like, the farm that we own, the mortgage is less than I was paying for a studio apartment in New York City, right? Like it's sure it's not free, but it's much more accessible than than I think people would guess, that even I would have guessed.
Yeah, it's there's a question that I often like asking people, and I've been asked so like through my 6 years of med school and 2 years of being a junior doctor, I would always ask doctors this, which is that if you won the lottery, what would you change anything about your life? Specifically, would you still continue working as a doctor? And I think the response to that has always been interesting because I've noticed that for about half of the people I've asked, they've said they would leave medicine completely, and the other half have said, "Oh, I'd still do medicine because it's fun, but I would do it part time."
Right.
And so I've been hearing this so often for the last like 8 years that it was the main thing, other than reading the 4 Hour Work Week, that started me on the path to kind of passive income, financial independence, all of that kind of stuff. Mostly
Sure.
with the end goal of wanting the kind of optionality or the autonomy to, stay in medicine if that's what I want to do. And I think it is what I want to do, but very much to do it part time because I don't think anything is particularly fun as a full time job.
One of the things you experience as a writer is that you like, although writing is this sort of self-indulgent thing or this individualist sort of creative thing, it's also a really important sort of skill or tool that society relies on, right? So you end up meeting people, whether they're tech billionaires or professional athletes or celebrities or CEOs, that have something they need to
Yeah.
communicate to an audience that they have trouble doing. So you end up meeting lots of interesting people as a writer. And what I've been sort of fortunate and surprised to witness over and over again, so when I talk to these people, what they always seem to wish they were writers. They're like, I'm so jealous of what you get to do. I wish I could do that. Or they have some book idea, or they have some plan where, like, as soon as they make enough doing this or that, then they're going to write a book. Or, their dream when they retire is to write books. And that was really helpful for me because it was like, okay, actually, I've been very fortunate in that I get to do the thing that other people are dreaming of doing. And that helps keep me honest day to day, not getting too distracted with other unrelated things. You know what I mean? There, especially if you're good at things. Like, for instance, I'm fascinated with real estate and I've done real estate investing, but I've met so many people who are in real estate who all they want to do is quit and write self-help books. They're sort of like, okay, I gotta make sure that I'm not, you know, quitting this thing that everyone wants to do this thing that actually not that many people want to do.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine that would be a nice place to be. And that's sort of where I think I have randomly landed through like this YouTube channel and various like side businesses and courses and stuff. And
Sure.
people sometimes ask, our mutual friend Ben Hardy was talking about having like setting a goal for the future and figuring out what you want. And I'm always a bit uneasy about that because I feel like I'm kind of living my end game scenario, which is that I get to make videos on the internet, I get to make money doing it, and I can kind
Right.
of do what I want. How do you think about like having goals and things in the context of also having enough and being satisfied with where your life currently is?
Being able to appreciate what you just said is like a shockingly rare thing because most people don't live in the present. They live either with regrets towards the past or with anxiety or ambition for the future, right? They've done X, but instead of appreciating that or understanding that, being able to do X on an ongoing basis is really wonderful, all they're thinking about is the next thing. And that's kind of a trap. I think they call this the hedonic treadmill.
Hmm.
But the idea is that like you're just always going, 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 and you're not actually moving any closer because you're moving the goalposts at the same time. So to be able to like, I think about it less like what are my goals as far as like concrete bits of success, and I think about it more as like what do I want my life to look like
Yeah.
day to day. And so, what I love doing is writing. I love spending time with my family. I love being outside. I love not having
Hmm.
meetings. I love not having, you know, obligations. I like having an empty calendar. I like where I live. I like my house. I like my life. So I like all those things. So I have to. There's a constant tension though between the opportunities that potentially take you away from those
Hmm.
things. So, you know, I know a lot of really successful writers that don't have time to write, and
Okay.
that's always interesting. And so I try to make decisions. And one of the things that pandemic has been really good for is like, I think all, even for me, like with speaking and business opportunities and having fun and doing stuff, I was telling myself like I can't say no to these things because one, they're all really good, and two, it's not actually costing me that much. I'm
Yeah.
still, doing well as a writer. But being forced to be basically home for 7 months, like I was able to really calculate just what it was costing me to be so active. And like coming out of the pandemic, whenever that is, it for me it's going to be less about how do I go back to how things were
Hmm.
and how do I make life go back to normal, and more like how do I preserve some of the strangeness of this new life that we're living.
Yeah. So it sounds like for you, you sort of over time, you've had this sort of journey of figuring out what you want and what brings you joy and what brings you fulfillment, and slowly tweaking your life so that you're optimizing for those things. I get
Yes,
because I guess once you've got the money thing sorted, and at that point you're like, okay, cool, now I can figure out what I actually want. At that point, it makes sense to optimize for those things.
that's right. And I think when people hear like, oh, once you've got the money sorted out, that feels very
Hmm.
unattainable and it feels very privileged. So, they're I think they're under the impression that that's, you know, tens of millions of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's no question having money creates security, which creates the ability to explore certain
Hmm.
things. But it's like the favorite parts of my day are this morning I woke up and I went for a walk with my kids. It was sitting there, right? It was the time I spent writing. It was the time I spent reading. I packed a lunch for myself, and it's going to be the time I spend exercising in the evening. The things I actually like are really, really cheap,
Hmm.
right? And really accessible. It's just that we tell ourselves we have to have more and more and more. So I think really understanding what the thing you want actually, what it actually costs is important. This is obviously something Tim talks about. That he goes like, you think you need to make $10 million to live on a beach, but maybe you haven't actually looked at like how cheap it is to live on the beach in this place or that place, or what is it like to live on the beach for 6 months of the year as opposed to every day of the year. So really, really thinking about what you want your life to be like. And I think that was another part of the pandemic because like
Hmm.
obviously I had a huge amount of speaking income evaporate, right? Like all live events basically got canceled. And so if you had told me at the beginning of the year, hey, your income is going to be reduced by X amount, one, I would have told you that's not possible. I can't afford that. Of course, like life doesn't care whether you can or not. It just says deal with
Yeah.
it. But also, I wouldn't have believed enough in myself to go, if you take away something over here, you can actually make up for it over here. So the inability to wrap your head around that is what prevents people from quitting their jobs or dropping out of school or walking away from something or selling something, or we struggle to really understand just how accessible most of the things we actually want are.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like the really unfortunate thing about that sort of advice is that it's usually a successful person giving it, and people will
Yes.
automatically say, "Oh well, easy for you to say you've got money, or you're a New York Times bestseller,
Sure.
or whatever." Um,
Sure. No, it's one of those like I wrote a piece maybe a year ago about sort of like what it feels like to get everything you thought you
hmm.
wanted. And the truth is when you really like you study it, it's like overwhelmingly people are like it's always disappointing. It's never what you thought. But that really is something you have to experience. You have to, but when people go, "Oh, it's easy for you to say you have money." What they don't realize is how the vast majority of people who have money still don't realize that, right? Like, sure, winning a gold medal in the Olympics, you might, by doing that, you might actually realize, like, hey, external success isn't nearly as validating as you think it
Yeah.
is, right? That's a lesson that it's hard to learn because you have to go win
Yeah.
an Olympic gold medal. But it's not for certain that everyone who wins an Olympic gold medal realizes that.
Yeah.
right? What most people do as they're standing on the medal stand and they're feeling that anticlimacticness, that bit of disappointment, they don't go, oh, I've been chasing the wrong thing. They go, ah, I have to do it again. I have to prove to people that this wasn't a fluke. That, or they say, I have to do it the most times that any person has ever done it. I have to beat Michael Phelps's record or
Mm.
whatever it is. And so the truth is, we can learn these lessons early or we can learn them late. And the earlier you learn them, the better off you will be.
Oh, yeah. And I feel like for me, through the last sort of 6 years of being into this sort of the personal development genre of books and reading your stuff and Tim's and listening to all the podcasts and things, especially with all the Stoicism stuff, it really
Yes.
does. It kind of is a proxy in a way for it's sort of a proxy for the lived experience of this thing, because like as soon as I started my YouTube channel, I knew that it was a trap to focus on the numbers. I was like, I am not going to set a goal for this
Sure.
at all. Who gives a toss whether I hit 10,000 or a million or 100,000 subscribers or anything like that? Because what matters is the process, the journey, enjoying each day on its own merit is kind of how I think about it.
It's hard because these things are shortcuts, right? It's like making doing a YouTube doing a video. It's hard to know whether it worked or
Mm.
not, whether it's good or not. So the numbers are a really easy way to outsource that, right? It's harder to sit and go, did it do what I set out to do? Is it at the quality that I wanted to do? Am I getting better? It's easy to do that. And I think the more you do whatever your thing is, the more information or data you have that allows you to decouple results from quality. So
Mm.
like, I've had books that have done extremely well. I've had books that have struggled. Doing enough books now, like the one of the books that I'm proudest of, it didn't like fail, but it didn't sell. Like the book I am proudest of is not the book that sold the most
Okay.
copies, and the book that has sold the most copies is not necessarily the book that I think is my best, right? Like you just sort of realize, oh, okay, these things might be correlated and there's often a relationship between the two,
Mm.
but it's not as clear cut as you think. And so you learn that with your own work, and then it's really important that you learn that with other people's work. So just because somebody sold, like Casey Neistat was telling me this the other day, I was talking to him about YouTube, and he's like, look, like, you did this video and it did 50,000 views. Comparing that to a video that did 5 million views is going to make you feel like you didn't succeed,
Yeah.
but you have no way of evaluating whether a video that reached 50,000 people profoundly had more impact than a video that gave 5 million people a slight chuckle, right? Like
Mm.
you have to really be clear about what it is that you're trying to do and the niche that you're trying to operate in. So like, I mean, I write about classical philosophy. Obviously, I want to be successful with these books, and I do measure myself in part by, am I reaching a large audience? But I don't sit there and compare myself to the author of The Secret, who's
Yeah.
selling bullshit to people, right? You have to know that if you sell like if you're willing to con people, for instance, you're going to reach more people, you're going to
Mm.
have more tools at your disposal than if you have ethics or lines that you're willing to draw.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, there was a line in your blog post. I think it was the one about what it feels like to have whatever you want, where you said, and I wrote this down. You said, "I was mowing the lawn when I found out that my book hit the number one bestseller list this year. I saw the email come in, and I went right back to mowing the lawn."
It just
Yeah.
doesn't change anything, and actually, like, so lives came out last week. So the way it works is a book comes out and the sales are from the sun like Saturday to Saturday or Sunday to Sunday.
Mm.
I forget what it is, but the point is, so you have all your pre-orders, and then you have your first week of sales, which for me ended on Sunday. And then it's usually today or tomorrow that you find out, like, this morning we got the numbers, and then later we'll find the bestseller list, right? So like there's sort of three things you could choose to define your success there. Success could be, are you proud of the book? Did it do well?
Mm.
success could be, did you have a number that you were trying to reach with sales, which is not fully in your control, but partly in your
Yeah.
control. And then there's the number least in your control, which is like, where did you land on a list,
Yeah.
or did you get nominated for a prize or something? And I think earlier in my career, I had those things reversed. I cared most about the thing that other people decided. Then next, I cared about the thing that I kind of influenced. And then finally, I had like sort of my own sense of whether I did it or not. And I do feel like I've reversed those. So yeah, when it came out, like I think that in that article I was talking about the obstacle is the way. Obstacle is the way hit #1 after it had already been out for 5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So 5 years of the book, working
Mm.
meant a lot more to me than some, belated acknowledgement that it was a success, right? So that was revealing. That was a revealing experience for me, because you're like, oh, these things are just lagging indicators, basically. They're not what actually counts.
Mm. Yeah, I think sort of I've also I'm on this journey of trying to reverse with the reliance that I put on the stuff that's outside of my control. Because certainly, like while I was going through school, my entire identity was based around I need to rank first in the year group, because it was just
Sure.
like the only thing I cared about, the only thing I knew to care about. And as I got to university and realized, oh, actually, you know, I'm not the smartest in the year in the year group anymore. That started to change, and now, like with kind of the businesses, the YouTube channel, being a doctor and stuff, it's just I feel like anytime I start looking at numbers, I know it leads down a bad rabbit hole. And for example, on the YouTube Studio app for creators, the very first thing you see when you open it is how is your latest video doing compared to your previous 10 videos. And if you have a
Right.
video that where you see it's 10 out of 10, like it is the 10th worst of your previous 10 videos, you get that feeling of, oh my God, my life is over. I might as well kill myself. And if it's like 1 out of 10, you're like, oh my God, there's like confetti that literally appears on the screen. And they're like, hey, you're doing
No,
well. The algorithm's promoting your video.
you need to have the ability to step outside your own brain and go, why is this here? This is here precisely because of the powerful reaction it elicits. Like, these are brilliant data scientists who know what to show to you, just like fashion designers know what will make you sort of envious or feel desire or whatever. Like, these are playing on impulses and drives that are very sensitive. And so one of the things that I've begun to do is, like, I don't have any connection to those things. Like, I don't touch them or access it. Like, my job is to make the work, and it usually gets filtered through other people. So I don't have Instagram on my phone. I don't see how the things are going. And so part of it is also just kind of creating a bubble where you do the work, because look, there are lots of people who are nailing it algorithmically day in and day out, but are they still going to be here 5 years from now, 10 years from now? So it's also like asking yourself, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to be the best at this, online competition, or are you trying to actually be the best at what it is that you do?
So, what does that look like for you in terms of how, like, what's the North Star by which you measure the quote success of your work, if any?
I mean, the part of it is, sort of ineffable, where it's just, do I feel like I'm getting better?
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
is the work getting more challenging? Am I pushing myself? Am I getting better? That's probably the main driver.
Okay.
The other thing I look for is like, is it resonating with people that I admire? So it's not like, is it selling lots of copies, but is the work standing up to an audience that I respect or admire?
Okay.
So, if you told me that I could sell 1 million more copies a year, but all the people who read it would be like people that suck, right? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if you told me like, hey, it's going to go way over their heads, or they're going to totally misconstrue it, but your books will be more successful. I don't know if that would get me excited. But if you told me like, hey, these world leaders are going to be using it to make decisions, that might matter to me.
Okay. And was that the case early on as well? Like I asked because I'm thinking about this book that I'm writing, and I'm thinking, oh, it's a big expectation to say that the people that I admire will think that this is a good book.
Sure.
Yeah. How do you think about that? Or does that kind of propel
Yeah,
you to
I
make it
mean,
actually good?
so oftentimes I am writing to like beginner
Yeah.
people, people who are early on in a thing, but it still happens that successful people read those books and they tell you whether you got it right or not. Do you
Okay.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I think it's not that you want to be vetted, but it's like if your work doesn't stand up to stress tests,
Hmm.
how good is it? And I think often like I want to hear from people who are doing real things in the real world that the work is resonating or landing or proving to be correct.
Okay. So, for example, if someone who's very familiar with Stoicism were to read one of your books, they wouldn't necessarily find anything particularly new in it, but they might say, "Hey, this was a really great way of presenting it."
Yeah, or let's say I'm writing a book about ego. I want a head coach in the NFL to be like, no, you nailed the real implications of ego. Or I want to hear from a general in the army, or,
Yeah.
like people who have actually worked with this issue in the real world. It'd be like if you wrote a book about some like, I don't know, medical cure,
Hmm.
and a bunch of anti-vaxxers were like, this is
Yep.
brilliant, uh, you
Yeah.
wouldn't that doesn't do anything for you because you know that their opinion is not worth
Yeah.
anything. Um, but if like the smartest medical minds or the smartest practitioners or teachers or whatever in your field were like, this gets it right, I think that would matter to you. I mean, it can't like, I also fully accept that I might write something that's, controversial or unique that pisses a lot of those people off. And so you can't use that as your sole, criteria, but you can kind of triangulate.
Okay. Interesting. A couple of other things I wanted to ask you for your take on. You've
Yeah.
got a blog post called "The Definition of Success is Autonomy." And
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about this concept because there's one school of thought that says that someone like Derek Sivers would say that the best decision is the one that gives you the most choices further down the line. And then there's
Sure.
the other side of the coin, which is that, well, at some point you have to stop optimizing for optionality and freedom and autonomy and instead start to, invest in your local community and just, get married and buy a house and make it nice and
Sure.
have kids and stuff. Like, how do you think about this balance between optionality and investment?
Yeah, I'm not as big on optionality. I am big on autonomy.
Okay.
And by that, I mean I want to be in control of my own destiny as opposed to contingent on approval, green
Mm.
lights, you know, uh, acceptance, whatever. Like you, by nature of going directly to your audience, um, you might not be as successful, you might not make as much money as a Hollywood director, but there are major Hollywood directors out there who have movie ideas that they can't do because their life is dependent on other
Yeah.
people approving what they get to do or not. One of the things I love about books and what always frustrates me when I am engaged in creative fields outside of writing is just all the bureaucracy and the bullshit that you have to put up with. So I'm autonomy to me is like, are you the captain of your own ship? That's what
Mm.
you want.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess that's actually different to optionality. It's yeah, yeah.
Optionality, yeah, to me is there's people who want no strings and they
Mm.
want to live in this kind of fantasy world. I mean, I have a wife and I have kids and I'm trying to travel less and it's not about like sort of, being unmoored. It's about I decide what I do every day.
Yeah. And in terms of autonomy, if you're optimizing for autonomy, then you in a way do have the option to like if you wanted to, you
Yeah.
could travel, but it just so happens that you don't really want to.
Well, and I chose to have children.
Yeah.
So it's not that the children are removing my autonomy.
Mm.
It's that that was something I want to do and is important to me.
Okay. Um, Another thing that I sometimes, well, quote, struggle with, and this is very much a first world problem, is the whole thing about making time for hobbies. Because
Yes.
I think, like, I'm lucky enough to be in a field in a place where I can consider it a hobby to tinker with my website or to write a script for
Sure.
another video or to read a nonfiction book. But these are all sort of productive hobbies in some capacity. And like last night, I spent a few hours just playing on the PlayStation for the first time in months.
Sure.
And now I'm really looking forward to the day ending so I can go back on the PlayStation. And there's that feeling of guilt associated with it, thinking that, well, I could be live streaming this on Twitch because then I'll get dual value out of this hobby that I'm doing. Do you worry about this at all? Like,
Yeah, there's a temptation to turn your hobbies into work
yeah,
always, and that can suck. Um, it's not the worst thing in the world, certainly, but
yeah,
look, you got a piano behind you. If your thing was, oh, now I've got to write songs and then I got to try to get a record deal, it's like, no, just enjoy it for its own sake. And look, you were a doctor and then you had the hobby of this stuff and
yeah.
it turned into a thing. So it's definitely possible that hobbies can turn into different avenues. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just the point is, if you're if if you're maniacally focused on one thing,
Mm,
it will make you good at that thing, but it will also make you very, very fragile, and it will limit your inputs and your diversity of inputs, which I think ultimately reduces the quality of the outputs.
okay. Yeah, interesting. And cool. I know we've only got 5 minutes left on
Yeah,
your
sure.
thing. So a few things I want to talk about with regards to the book. I think
Yeah.
what's dead time versus alive time? I think I came across this on the blog.
Yeah, that's in my book Ego is the
Mm.
Enemy. I mean, this is a this pandemic's a great period of it. Robert Greene said that to me. He said, is this going to be a live time for you or dead time? Meaning, when things are outside of your control, whether you're waiting to graduate from medical school or you're waiting for your contract to end or you're stuck in an airport on a delayed flight, how do you decide to use that time? Do you write it off as dead, that like I just have to sit here and wait for this? Or do you decide to use it? And so I'm a big believer in using time. How do you use your time productively, effectively, but not just to do more and more work? Maybe you're using that time to explore a hobby or to meet someone or to take a break. Like there's lots of things you can do, but the point is, you don't know how much time you're going to get. So to waste it, to write it off as dead, is a profoundly arrogant and short-sighted thing to do.
Mm. Yeah, and there was that quote that it's sort of the moments that happen in between the moments, or or what's
Yes,
that effect?
totally,
Yeah,
totally.
cool. And one thing that you're very bullish on, it seems, is the value in just going for a walk.
Yeah.
What is the value in just going for a walk? Because I'll be honest, this is
I
something
think
that
the
I don't
fact that
really
it
do.
has, yeah, that it has no value is what makes it valuable,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So every morning I go for a long walk. I did 3 miles with my kids this morning. It's being outside, it's getting active, but I tend to find that being on the move unlocks my mind in ways that, just sitting there trying to work isn't going to do. So, I try to have phone free time when
Mm.
I'm walking. I try to be outside. I try to have conversations. I try to connect. I try to actually see what's happening around me. And look, I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know all the reasons why it works. I just know it's had a very big impact on my quality of life.
Ah, okay. That's very cool. Do you have a journaling practice of any sort?
Yeah, every morning I sit with a journal, actually like two or three. But to me, Stoicism and journaling are inextricable concepts.
Okay.
You cannot separate one from the other. Stoicism, in the way that Buddhism and meditating are the
Mm.
same, journaling and Stoicism are the same. You have to write and reflect and meditate on your thoughts and articulate them kind of into maxims and aphorisms that you're then able to hold yourself to.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, and I noticed that the tagline for your blog is meditations on strategy and life or something, and I was intrigued by the choice of word. Like, why have you called it meditations? Like, what does that word mean to you?
Well, that's obviously a deep Stoic term.
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius is writing, that translates as to himself. I think as a writer, if you're not also writing for yourself as an audience, you're probably performing more than you're actually
Oh.
putting anything valuable out there.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So you can be writing to a younger version of yourself. So it could be stuff you already know.
Mm.
But I definitely don't write my books from the perspective of someone who has mastered this thing.
Mm.
I write it from someone who is in the middle of exploring this thing.
Okay. And so when you're writing your thoughts in a way, yeah, you're sort of writing to yourself, but you're also writing for them to come into your frame of mind, I guess.
Exactly. And I'm better at the thing for having written the book than and that's to me, again, we talked about your own metric of success. If the book, if Lives of the Stoics sells 0 copies, which is not the case, it's doing great. But if it had sold 0 copies, it still would have been a worthwhile experience because I understand Stoicism at a much more deep and profound level for having spent a year and a half wrestling with the material.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, and then final thing. So I'm going to be doing
Yes.
a book club episode of this. I have this series
Oh, amazing.
where I kind of review books. I did one last week about obstacle. No, about yeah, obstacle is the way. I wonder
Oh,
if you
thanks.
can just do a quick sort of what is the book about, because then I can take the soundbite from here and include it in the video.
Sure. So my other books are about what the Stoics said. Lives of the Stoics is about what the Stoics did, who they were as people. So what does the life of a philosopher look like, and what can we learn from their actions, from their struggles, trying to live up to the ideals? Because ultimately, that's what philosophy is about. It's about being a wise and good person. So it's an exploration of biography of the Stoics and what we can learn from their most important moments as opposed to their most important words.
Amazing. All right. I think that is our time. Thank you so much for taking the time, Ryan. This has been a lot of fun. And everyone, there are links to pre-order or order now the book in the video description, so you should check it out. This is now my bedtime reading for the next few days, and then yeah, it'll be coming to a YouTube channel near you at some point in the near future.
Well, thanks, man. And look, hit me up about, you got my email. Hit me up about your book. I mean, obviously, I think about this stuff a
Hmm.
lot, and so if you have questions, just ask me.
Amazing. That would be awesome. Yeah, I will chat to you about it off the record.
Yeah, of course.
Good stuff. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining
All right,
this
see you, man.
deep dive with Ryan Holiday, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.